Dick Cavett has struggled with depression since he was 18 while attending Yale. Back then, no one discussed mental illness. They referred to it as a slump. By 1980, the smartest talk show presenter in America collapsed on an aeroplane. The man who conducted interviews with music stars and presidents ultimately required shock treatment. His life was saved by it. He might be dying inwardly and grinning on television. After overcoming a stroke and years of personal struggles, Cavett, who is now in his 80s, must face yet another unanticipated enemy. Born in a small Nebraskan town, Dick Cavett was surrounded by instructors, books, and the peaceful cadence of school life. Until they eventually made Lincoln their home, his parents, who were both teachers, were frequently on the move. There Cavett started to grasp the value of asking questions, the power of words, and the nuanced art of listening. He did not only attend school, he was raised in that world. The way Cavett took their principles with him was the real legacy, even if his father and stepmother were eventually honored with a school named after them. Then everything was different. Cavett's mother passed away from cancer when he was 10 years old. The loss was profound. She was present one day, and then absent the next. Pain like that doesn't simply go away, it becomes a part of who you are. Additionally, it increased Cavett's awareness, sensitivity, and humanity. You could feel that empathy later on, when he sat opposite his chat show guests. He listened instead than only speaking, and individuals were more forthcoming with him than they were with anyone else. Cavett was performing even before he gained notoriety for his speeches. He immersed himself in magic when he was a teenager. Real, trained sleight of hand, not just card tricks for kicks. He began making money from shows at the age of 16. He was mentored. He attended contests. He received honors. He even happened to meet Johnny Carson, a teenage magician. Unbeknownst to them at the time, their lives would eventually intersect and influence late-night television. Cavett was more than just a witty card player or a keen speaker. He possessed physical strength. He wasn't simply a gymnast at Lincoln High, he was a champion. At the state level, he took home gold. He carried that discipline and attention to detail with him. He was elected president of the student council. He performed in plays. Before graduating from middle school, he supervised a radio program. During the summer, he worked as a caddy and interacted with individuals from several cultures. Richer, more ostentatious, yet still only human. All of these were small steps towards the man he had grown into. Things became more difficult when he arrived to Yale. The task was heavy. The emotions were the same. He began to exhibit depressive symptoms, but he persisted. He studied English first. He then turned to theater. He got involved in radio, performed in plays, and established a niche for himself in the entertainment industry. He would sneak into TV studios in New York City on the weekends and pretend to work there to see how things were run. Already, he had a larger goal in mind. He accepted any jobs he could find after graduating. Time magazine's copy boy, typist, and retail detective. He kept one eye on the spotlight the entire time. Then came the turning point in the story. Still working as a menial copy boy, Cavett learned that Jack Paar needed assistance creating jokes for his program. Cavett then took a risk. In a lift, he gave Paar the 20 jokes he had written. On live television that same evening, Paar utilized them. The crowd burst out laughing. In an instant, Cavett moved from being a nobody in the corridors to a staff writer earning 10 times his previous income. It was more than just a career break on that lift trip, the beginning of a legend. He was a part of TV history in no time. He penned jokes for Johnny Carson after Jack Paar. He developed his reputation behind the scenes, wrote opening monologues, and contributed to the tone of late-night humor. He once followed Groucho Marx several blocks simply to chat after meeting him at a funeral. That audacious action resulted in friendship. Groucho had faith in him. Carson did too. Paar did too. The finest was teaching Cavett. He was trusted by 3 titans of humor. Cavett was the Tonight Show's talent supervisor, and he had a penchant for seeing stars before anybody else did. He shot at Woody Allen. At the age of 19 he signed Barbra Streisand. When some were hesitant, he even campaigned for the Rolling Stones. He finally made the decision to emerge from the shadows. He gave his debut stand-up performance in front of a completely empty room in 1964. He felt uneasy. Still, the laughter came. Audiences adored his witty, dry and keen humor, which he discovered his voice. Among his finest lines. He even met Lenny Bruce while working in expensive gigs in San Francisco and Chicago. People began to recognize him gradually. He appeared on talk shows and game shows, and advertisements. And all changed once more when he was cast on the Ed Sullivan program. It didn't appear that Dick Cavett would disrupt late-night television. When he initially appeared in front of the camera, he wasn't ostentatious, boisterous, or even very well known. His first guest on his ABC morning talk program, which he debuted on March 4, 1968, was Buckminster Fuller. Cavett has been making a consistent salary behind the scenes for years, creating jokes for celebrities like Johnny Carson. He was facing the lights now, though. The AM time slot was inconvenient. His incisive, reflective tone just didn't fit the upbeat, brisk tone that viewers desired for their breakfast. ABC took notice, and instead of letting him pass away in silence, they took an unexpected action. In the late-night battle, ABC pitted Cavett against Carson by the end of 1969. It was audacious, it was dangerous, and it was successful. All of a sudden Cavett, the quiet, intelligent Nebraskan who graduated from Yale with a degree, had his own platform, and he took full advantage of it. He didn't play it safe or try to get chuckles. He invited thought-provoking visitors. Cavett tended towards profundity, whilst Carson tended towards humor. That's what made him unique. His interviews came out as candid, inquisitive discussions rather than show business. He inquired about new films from more than simply celebs. He inquired about their convictions, regrets, and uncertainties. And people answered. Several of the top celebrities who often shunned conversation agreed to Cavett. On his platform, the renownedly secretive Katharine Hepburn revealed herself. Unpredictable and fierce, Marlon Brando opted to talk about Native American rights on Cavett's show and then assaulted a photographer. Jimi Hendrix even made an appearance, not just to perform, but also to discuss his craft in a way that had never been done before. These weren't stops for publicity. They were genuine moments. Additionally, Cavett's crew was working behind the scenes like a chessboard, setting up visitors to start conversations rather than just a round of applause. Cavett performed something unprecedented in the early 1970s, long before the Vietnam War was over. On national television, he welcomed actual veterans. They were merely two young guys who had served in the war and had quite different views on it. They were neither performers nor politicians. John Kerry was one among many who opposed the war. John O'Neill, on the other hand, defended it. There was genuine attentiveness. Millions of people watched. Richard Nixon was also incensed in the White House. Nixon was subsequently captured on secret tapes saying, "Is there any way we can screw Cavett's?" That was the power of one TV interview. He didn't stop though. He invited a wheelchair-bound crippled veteran one day. Just the unvarnished reality of combat, without any glitzy stage effects or filters, in the living rooms of America, that had never been seen on television before. PBS produced a whole program years later to commemorate Cavett's actions during that period. When it was difficult to listen, he offered people a voice. It wasn't only about war either. Cavett dived right into the day's most heated topics: gun control, racism, and Watergate, while other hosts resorted to Hollywood rumors. Lester Maddox was a segregationist politician who Cavett booked. Maddox rushed off the stage because the confrontation became so intense. Later on, Randy Newman used the moment as the first line of a song. Additionally, Cavett sat down with James Baldwin and led him to talk without merely asking questions. Cavett destroyed his prepared piece when Robert F. Kennedy was slain. That made it possible to have a meaningful discussion on gun control. Others wouldn't touch the folks he brought on. Anti-establishment icons include Jane Fonda and John Lennon. Cavett didn't give a damn whether conservatives were offended. The Nixon crew detested it. They wanted Cavett off the air because he was the ideal example of a liberal thinker. However, viewers saw a change. Someone who didn't hesitate to pose challenging inquiries. Additionally, he transformed late-night television into a platform for authors, artists, and intellectuals. Cavett remained in New York and hosted literary greats like Norman Mailer and Truman Capote, while Johnny Carson performed in California. He even put Capote and Groucho Marx together one evening to see what would happen. Salvador Dali, a surrealist, appeared at a later date, transforming the studio from a discussion show to something more like a dream. Cavett did not hurry them. He let them to quarrel, explore and be surprised. But it wasn't all politics and in-depth discussion on Cavett's show. It occasionally swerved into the fantastical. Sitting on Cavett's stage in 1971, health food pioneer Jerome Rodal said with pride that he intended to live to 100. Shortly after, he sagged in his chair and passed away from a heart attack while on the show. The tale went viral even though the tape was never broadcast. People still claim to have seen it on TV even if they didn't. According to Cavett, false memories resulting from a single traumatic experience occur often. Then came the crazy visitors. 3 actors, Peter Falk, Ben Gazzara, and John Cassavetes, arrived intoxicated in one notorious event. Cavett eventually left his own set in exasperation after attempting to keep the act continuing. He also conducted an interview with prominent personality and transsexual lady Christine Jorgensen. However, the discussion became very intimate. She left. In an attempt to fill the void, Cavett was forced to stare into the camera. Cavett gained the moniker the thinking person's talk show host, even though she never outperformed Carson in the ratings. He didn't act foolish. He didn't give in. He didn't pose predetermined queries. He paid attention. He prodded. When it counted, he said nothing. Actors like Laurence Olivier, Marlon Brando, and Katharine Hepburn appealed to many who would not often watch TV at all. Cavett was the finest, according to Brando, who is notorious for avoiding interviews. Cavett made it worthwhile, not because he made it simple. It wasn't because of Cavett's lack of talent that ABC ended the Dick Cavett Show in 1974. Although the show received critical acclaim and was nominated for an Emmy, network management deemed it too sophisticated for the typical viewer. Cavett was out in an instant. However, rather of going away, he began a new chapter that brought him to almost all of America's major TV networks. He wasted no time. He tried his hand at hosting a brief Saturday night variety program on CBS in 1975. It kept his name out there, but it didn't last long. He discovered that PBS was a better fit by 1977. Things started to make sense again at that point. Cavett was able to delve deeply into political and cultural discussions without the burden of commercial sponsors. He asked more insightful questions than other hosts dared to during his 5 years there. He continued running. After that run was over, he went to the USA Network in 1985. Surprisingly, he then made a quick late-night return to ABC. CNBC was where he stayed the longest. In an era of tabloid television, he presented insightful interviews from 1989 to 1996. Cavett remained with intellectuals, authors, singers, and public individuals who had something genuine to offer, while other talk programs sought gossip and Hollywood stars. He had no intention of being Johnny Carson. His attempt was to imitate Dick Cavett. Brains over buzz was the result. Cavett was more than simply a host, though. He also authored. There were a lot of incisive anecdotes, acerbic humor, and behind-the-scenes drama in his 2010 book talk show. He had conversations with John Lennon, Bette Davis, Richard Nixon, and Groucho Marx. However, the book also revealed his love of magic, his early years in Nebraska, and his opinions on American politics and life. He received criticism for some of his views, such as his support of Don Emus during a significant dispute. Cavett, however, was unconcerned. His thinking was constantly sharper, and his tongue was always sharper. Cavett continued to appear in unexpected locations, even when he wasn't on television. On The Simpsons, he provided his own voice. His interviews were given new life in films when they appeared in Apollo 13 and Forrest Gump. He made an appearance at an exclusive party scene in the 2012 film Gossip Girl. Yep, Gossip Girl. Cavett was even portrayed by an actress on HBO's Minx as a representation of shrewd-edge 1970s television. His legacy extends that far. In the early 2000s, he even made it on Broadway, when he narrated the Rocky Horror Show. In an odd historical aside, He was present when Marlon Brando struck a paparazzo in the face during a recording of the Dick Cavett program. Cavett came full circle with his subsequent work with Turner Classic Movies. He relaunched his well-known interviews to a younger audience between 2006 and 2007. He provided context for each of his interviews with icons such as Katharine Hepburn and Groucho Marx on TCM. This was instruction, rather than nostalgia. Additionally, Dick Cavett's Watergate, which was broadcast on PBS in 2014, demonstrated how his program evolved into a sober forum for political discourse. Even Nixon detested it. He also questioned if it was possible to screw Cavett in a now-famous White House recording. That instance demonstrated that Cavett's influence extended well beyond discussion programs. Even though he never showed it, he possessed power. In print, Cavett discovered a new voice as well. He became a cultural critic as a result of his New York Times blog, which was eventually included in the book Brief Encounters. He didn't hesitate to address issues like politics, mental health, and the ridiculousness of contemporary life. At a period when most people were still keeping quiet about depression, he wrote about it in a straightforward and honest manner. His political criticism, in which he ridiculed generals, commentators, and everyone else who offended him, reflected this honesty. However, his writing was elegant even in those days. It was never only tirades. There were allusions to music, ranging from Leonard Bernstein to Mozart. Dick Cavett, meantime, met Carrie Nye in a Yale theater class. And then something suddenly made sense. He was still a college student. She was already becoming well known in the theater, and they soon discovered that they were spending an increasing amount of time together. It was more than love. In fact, they collaborated on stage together in pieces such as Auntie Mame and Charlie's Aunt. Their performances reflected the camaraderie they had off stage. Following their 1964 wedding in New York City, they were inseparable. Industry insiders likened them to Anne Bancroft and Mel Brooks. Together, the two powerful personalities just made sense. Carrie was bolder and sharper than Dick, who was the dry wit, yet they somehow wonderfully balanced each other out. They jumped right into summer theater in Williamstown, Massachusetts, after Yale. They chased acting jobs, had little victories, and were broke but in love. One particular tale sums up their relationship well. Dick didn't have the money for a ring, but he still wanted to pop the question. He so spent 2 full weeks working at a timber yard, moving bulky timber, perspiring in sawdust, and attempting to blend in with the actual workers. He would get ready every night and head straight to Carrie's concert simply to see her sing. The fact that this Yale student was doing all of this for an engagement ring was unbelievable to everyone at the yard. However, he was. The ring had significance even if it wasn't large by celebrity standards. It wasn't just purchased, it was earned. That sacrifice essentially encapsulated their relationship, which was equal parts labor and emotion. Then, after spending decades together, everything was different. Carrie passed away from lung cancer in 2006. Her age was 69. Dick was by himself at their flat in Manhattan when all of a sudden, the quiet was overwhelming. It was more than simply sadness to lose her after 42 years. It was confusing. Dick attributed her cancer to the fact that she had smoked for the most of her life. He said that the smokes were only a small part of her vintage Hollywood look, which was reminiscent of Marlene Dietrich. Her passing also occurred during a difficult time for him. He had previously struggled with depression during his time in college. Sadness only made things worse. Every little thing, like brewing coffee or sitting in a peaceful room, served as a reminder that she had left. He began to write more, expressing his suffering in his essays for the New York Times. At least somewhat, it was helpful. The fact that their Montauk home had somehow foreseen this suffering was among the most peculiar aspects. It was dubbed Tick Hall, and there was this lovely old seaside home from the 1800s. They purchased it in the 1960s and used it as a getaway from the city. However, it was destroyed by fire in 1997. The chimney was the only one that made it through. They wouldn't have let it go, but most people would. "You can rebuild a home, but you can't rebuild a person," Carrie replied. And they did precisely that. They reconstructed it precisely as it had been, but it took 4 years. After she died, That house became a memory preserved in glass and wood, a testament to tenacity. After years of attempting to sell it, Dick eventually did so in 2021. By the time it sold, the price had decreased from $62 million to $23.6 million. By that time, however, money was seldom the main concern. 4 years after Carrie's death, Dick took an unexpected action. He fell in love once more. He married novelist Martha Rogers at the age of 74. It was only a little ceremony in New Orleans, and they kept it quiet. Dick became a stepfather for the first time when Martha brought 2 children into the marriage. They relocated to Ridgefield, Connecticut, a peaceful community with an artistic atmosphere and colonial beauty. The ocean was far away. It was far from Tick Hall, but just what he needed. According to friends, Martha restored his happiness. She loved ancient buildings, literature, and ideas just as much as he did. Constructed in 1812, their house evolved into a novel form of retreat that was distinct from Montauk, but yet rich in history. Dick Cavett left Nebraska for Yale at the age of 18. The year was 1954, and he was unaware that the academics weren't the true obstacle. Something quiet and gloomy was inside of him. Nobody used the term depression back then. There was no such thing as casual chat, particularly among first-year college students. It was referred to as a slump or a student letdown. However, Cavett was experiencing more than simply homesickness. He carried it with him. Simple tasks seemed unattainable because of it. He then said that although suicides occurred annually at institutions like Princeton, Yale managed to avoid this destiny. He still carried a weight that no one could see. The odd thing was that campuses had not yet been overrun with narcotics. All of this was happening before the fun of drugs. He joked. It never quite went away, but it lessened enough for him to graduate. For the rest of his life, it would accompany him. Cavett was more than simply a college graduate by 1975. He was famous. He was famous because of his chat program. He was making people laugh while interviewing legends. Off camera, however, he was disintegrating once more. At 39, the depression had returned with more vigor. This time he sought the help of a physician called Nathan Klein, who was a pioneer in the use of drugs to treat mental illness. Something Klein gave him worked. It made him feel like himself again, but it didn't solve everything. He continued for some time. He continued to work. On TV he never stopped grinning. However, it didn't end there. There was only a pause. The actual breakdown was yet to occur. In 1980, it struck. At the age of 44, Cavett was seated aboard a Concorde plane, awaiting takeoff. And then, suddenly, something broke. He began to perspire. He had trouble staying motionless. People took notice. They had to remove him off the aircraft. A short time later, he was in a hospital bed. He required electroconvulsive treatment, or ECT, according to the doctors. Back then, many were afraid of the term. It brought to mind violent films and inhumane treatment. Cavett, however, accepted the chance. And a remarkable event took place. He exclaimed, "Look who's back among the living," as his wife entered the room following the therapy. It was like turning on a switch. It felt like magic, he stated afterwards. This aspect of his tale was not concealed. He actually talked about it a lot. He desired for everyone to know that ECT saved his life. It restored his life. Rather of remaining silent, Cavett became a voice for the voiceless. He made an appearance in A Patient's Viewpoint, a film on depression, in 1993. He described the actual sensation. He made it clear to the world that asking for aid is acceptable. He talked candidly about his treatments on Larry King's show. People approached him on the street as millions watched. "Mr. Cavett, you saved my father's life," one guy exclaimed. At that moment, Cavett came to the realization that perhaps the most valuable thing he had ever done was to share his grief. He claimed that aside from situations in which it may benefit people like that, stardom was largely pointless. Cavett continued to work despite his worst agony. At one point, he felt so empty within that he interviewed Joan Plowright and Laurence Olivier. There was nowhere he wanted to be. He claimed to be unable to understand the meaning of the cue cards he was looking at. He believed that everyone could see his damaged state. However, Marlon Brando advised him to watch the interview again years later. Cavett was taken aback. He had a good appearance. He showed no symptoms of the internal conflict. It's called automatic pilot, Brando stated. When everything else fails, it is what artists turn to. Cavett became aware of how simple it is to conceal sadness, even from medical professionals. He had heard from Kay Jamison, a psychiatrist, that she had been flamingly crazy. She was still able to deceive her coworkers. That is the peril of quiet. However, Cavett was more than a guy suffering. He was a television legend. In addition to being nominated for several Emmys, he won 3 of them. His charm and brilliance were praised. His discussions with Marlon Brando, Katharine Hepburn, and Mel Brooks became well known. He was nominated for a Grammy for narrating books. He did more than host chat shows. Among the last great conversationalists was him. Cavett had to deal with a new problem in recent years. He suffered a stroke. He has freely discussed it, and referred to it as a nasty, wicked thing. It physically slowed him down. Even though he now utilizes a walker or cane, his mental faculties are intact. He is still going strong. He's even considering writing once again. He claims that writing improves his mood. That remains the same. Cavett discovered a fresh audience even in his 80s. His previous interviews began to gain popularity on YouTube. His words now have a lasting impact on young people who had never heard of him before. He even featured in a music video, which was a stunning decision. He regained his coolness. Documentaries on his work during the Watergate and Vietnam eras were broadcast by PBS. His legacy continued to expand. Yale was never forgotten by Cavett. It molded him. The Depression started there. He learned how to act there. He eventually became the one who would sit across from legends and pose the questions that no one else dared to ask. He still discusses the anguish now. He continues to discuss American politics and the cultural gap. He is honest in his speech. His voice is sorrowful. And he talks as though he has experienced something that most people are unable to even identify.